Okay, so as I was studying, I came across a story that kind of reminded me similar to some things that we were more recently going through, but it kind of gave me a different perspective. I was reading about Paul, and when he was set to go to trial in Italy, they had to travel there from where he was. And when they got on the ship, it was him and about 250, maybe a little bit more people traveling on the ship, joint prisoners with him, and those who were, the shipmen, the people who operated the ship, the soldiers. And as they began to travel, there was a great storm. And the storm was like hurricane-like. And Paul, just a prisoner, approached the people who were the captains of the ship and the soldiers and said that we should stop, we should turn back, we shouldn't go because this storm is really bad and we're going to lose the ship and everyone on the ship. And because he was just a prisoner, they didn't really listen to him. They kind of like just continued to plow forward and do what they thought was best. And so they decided to sail along the shore, close to the edge of the shore, and that they wouldn't be tossed as much closer to the shore as they would further out at sea. And they thought that if they could just get far enough, that they would be able to rest in Crete. Paul urged that was not a good idea and that the storm was going to get worse. So as they were getting ready to set sail, the winds calmed down, and it was a warm breeze from the south that came. And this gave them the mindset that Paul was wrong, that this is our opportunity, that we can go and we can get to Crete the way we first thought. But the storm was actually a nor'easter. So if you guys are familiar with how nor'easterns are here, they kind of do that. They kind of have this odd, real calm, sometimes even warm, before the storm actually just turns so violent, because nor'eastern winds are like, they can rip your roof off and they can like have hurricane power, but they're just straight line winds. And so the ship began to get really beat up really, really badly based upon these winds. And the ship was falling apart, and the men became really, really fearful. The storm went on for 14 days. And just as they got to the point where everything they tried to do to offset the storm would not work. So they just said, there's nothing more to do. Let's just hunker down, and wherever the storm takes us, we're just kind of just going to go with it. Right. And so at the 14th day, the men were so shaken that Paul came to them and said for them to not worry, that they were going to be okay, that no one would die, that the ship was going to be destroyed, but no one would die, because an angel had visited him the night before and assured him that no one would die with the rest of the journey. And he also began to encourage them to eat, because they had some time yet still in the storm, that they were going to need strength to be able to endure the storm. And so he encouraged them to eat as much as they could. And so as they ate, they began to throw the rest of the wheat off of the boat, when they were trying to lighten the boat, because the boat was being overtaken by water. And so they were trying to lighten the load of the boat. And there were some men that decided that they were going to also get off of the boat. But Paul instructed them that the people on the boat would only be saved if all of the men stayed on the boat. No one could do something outside of to get away from this storm. That God was going to keep the people on the storm, and that only the boat would be destroyed. And so the men, they were going to continue anyway. But because Paul said this, they cut the ropes and stopped them from being able to get on the little escape ship, or the lifesaver ship. Cut the side of the rope so that the ship would fall down, and so that the men could not get off. Finally, after another 14 days, they got to a little island, and they allowed the ship to kind of come up on the land in order to make it stop. And when they got there, the people there were very, very nice and kind to them. And as they began to set a fire there was a serpent that rose up as they were putting the wood down. It was a snake that rose up and bit Paul's hand. And when he got bit, the people there thought that he was going to die. He thought that he was cursed, because they believed the serpents were as a god. So they believed that that God was angry with them for setting the fire and coming there. But when Paul just shook the snake off and just kind of let the snake go, and he never swelled up or died or anything, they began to believe that Paul was like a god. And as Paul resided there for some time, let me go back because I'm missing a point. Because Paul prophesied to them, and his prophecy was accurate. When the prisoners were getting off of the ship, they wanted to actually kill the prisoners that could swim, because they didn't want them to escape, and they wanted to bound some of the other prisoners. But because Paul's great prophecy, they didn't want to bound him. They didn't want to kill him or do anything to him. So that's why he was allowed to get off of the ship with them, and he was able to move around freely like he was not a prisoner. But while he was there, these things transpired with the snake. They thought he was a god. And then when he got to the people, they took him to their leader, one of the captains there, and he began to heal people and do great miracles there, and bring people healing and bring attention to God. And so I'm going to stop right there, because the topic that the Lord gave me was when your life is hit by a nor'eastern, and the importance of understanding strategy and tactics. Because last week I was talking to you guys about the story of Naaman and how important his obedience to God was when the prophet gave him instructions regarding his leprosy, right? And obedience is really, really, really important. Sometimes we have a way, especially now and today, we kind of like, we hear what we want to hear and we move towards the things of God the way we want to move towards them, and we don't always follow through to specific instructions. But there are some times that there's going to be storms that's going to hit your life, and there's going to be some things that's going to come your direction that is going to require you to follow the specific instructions of God, right? Why is this important? Because tact and strategy in the tactics of God versus the tactics of the enemy are very, very, very important. And we have to understand at all times that we are in a war. This is a war that we're in. It is a spiritual war. But we cannot get so complacent with day-to-day life and our day-to-day focuses and our desires that we forget that this is something that we're actually in, right? I know that we like to think, life is kind of what we make it. It is when it comes down to how we face it, but it's a war nonetheless. And so I wanted to go over some definitions and have a basic conversation with you guys, right? Because it was important. It was important that Naaman listened. In order to heal his leprosy, he had to follow through and dip himself in the Jordan 7 times. It was important that they listened to the instructions of Paul, even down to allowing the extra men to get off of the boat in order for them to live and survive, right? It was very important that they followed the instructions, right? And so because the enemy has a strategy, sometimes God will give us specific instructions, or sometimes he'll have a leader to instruct you, a person, a prophet, a mouthpiece of God, somebody that actually is speaking on God's behalf, right? And so I just want to go over 3 definitions real quick. And the first one is tact. And tact is a keen sense of what to say or do to avoid giving offense, a skill in dealing with difficult situations, right? So that's just knowing what to say and how to say it. Because Paul had to have that, right? He was a prisoner. How else would he know how to approach the guards and the captain of the ship that he was prisoner on in order to convince them to listen to anything that he had to say, right? Also Naaman, because you got to remember, right? Naaman was from Syria, and Syria and Israel are enemies, and they were at odds with each other because the handmaiden that came from that gave Naaman's wife the information about Isa was an Israelite. She was a young Israel woman, a young Jewish woman who was captured, and one of the times that Syria was crossing over and attacking Israel. And so that also took tact for them to go cross over to present to the king that he wanted to be healed by someone there in their land. So all of those things take great tact. Tactics is slightly different. It deals with the use of deployment of troops in actual combat and the maneuvering them in battle. So tactics is how the soldiers are placed on the field in order to win the battle, right? So it's having the mindset to say, okay, if this 3 come from this angle and 4 here and 3 here, and we see the target, and if it's giving the instructions, it's able to give the instructions in the war in order to be able to properly position the people to win the battle. So that's important for us to remember, right? Because I keep talking to you guys about following God's instructions, right? Sometimes God will tag team people. Sometimes say, Judy, I want you to pray with Maddie, right? And Christian, it's really important that you pray for Anthony. And he gives these instructions, and we don't know. We don't know why he's telling us to do anything. He's just telling us, because that is the tactics of God to offset maybe what someone else is going through or how the enemy is going to or attack someone else. How about he'll sometimes tell us to do things for someone else so that we're not focused on what the enemy's getting ready to do to us, right? There's times that God has had me warring for someone else so hard that I didn't even realize that the whole time I was going through my storm, I was so concerned about someone else that God worked my own situation out, right? So he has these tactics that he uses to position his people, right? The third one and the last one that I want to talk to you about before we open up conversation is strategy. So when you're talking about strategy in the military use, a distinction is made between strategy and tactics. Strategy is the utilization during both peace and war of all nations' forces through long-scale, long-range planning and development to ensure victory, right? Strategy. That's the Bible. God gave us strategy in his word. Right? He gave us the strategy because he knew that this was a war that we would not be prepared for. And he knew that it was going to take long-term strategy. So he's given us strategy in peace. He's given us strategy in war. It's a long-term planning. So when he gives us instructions and he says for us to not do something, most of us think, oh, well, he's telling me, he just, I guess, bossing me around or something. Like, I don't know. Like, he just doesn't want me to do this. right? But it's not. It's because it gives life and power to the tactics and tact and strategy of the enemy. When it's a war and you have a leader that can foresee what's getting ready to come, and they're telling you what the strategy is long term and how we should position ourselves during the times of battle, it's really, really important to obey. And I don't know why God is keep dealing with me about this crossing over into the new year and the importance of our obedience. Right? We know that there are some things coming to the world. We know that there's getting ready to be a time of famine, and there's going to be more plagues and pestilence. And we know that we're just in a time of the groaning and the moaning, the labor pains of what's getting ready to come. And we have to be so aware when God is instructing us, and not so easily distracted by our emotions or things that the enemy does to kind of tug us in a different direction, or just in not following through in instructions. Some of us, we're like past that emotional stuff. Some of us, we are. Some of us, we have our emotions to a point where we can kind of gauge, okay, I feel fear, or I feel these negative thoughts or emotions, and I know that that's the devil. Like, I know it. I got it, Pastor. I got it, right? But what about just the lack of follow through, right? Sometimes we have a lack of follow through, right? We only adhere to a portion. We do just enough, right? We won't do what we're like Naaman was. And because it's not exactly what we think or going the way we thought, or it's not what we wanted to hear, we get an attitude and we get angry and we walk away, and we don't move towards doing it at all, right? And sometimes it takes someone else to come to us to encourage us to move towards it. But guess what? Sometimes that gap in time also leaves room for the enemy to move into work, right? It's important that we follow through when God gives us the instruction. And I know that can be a little bit hard in this day and time, because a lot of people don't want to be told what to do, right? There's a lot of rebellion out here. No one wants to hear you should or shouldn't, right? Everybody just, I don't know. No one wants to hear anything anymore. Like, they're offended to hear about themselves. They're offended that you're giving them direction. They're bothered that you're telling them what to do. But in the days of God, the prophet or the person who God used was very important. They were highly revered. And not saying that people don't anymore, but because people have watered down, or they've misused, or so many people are calling themselves prophets or being called prophets and they're not actually prophets, or so many people are false leaders and they're misleading you down a path that, really you're miserable, or you can kind of tell that they're misusing the word or misguiding you in some form or fashion. So you can kind of pick up these little subtleties that make you less apt to follow the voice of a true leader. Right? So it's like the enemy that's a part of his strategy. That was a part of his strategy. If he floods the church with falsehood, and false leaders and false prophets and confusion, and people are always like more apt to doubt what the leader or the prophet's telling them to do, right? Or you have these leaders that are out here telling you to do foolishness, things that don't have anything to do with serving God. And so there's been a great confusion amongst the people. But it is going to become a time where it's going to become very important for you to listen to the mouthpiece of the prophet. It's going to, because there's getting ready to be some things that are going to happen. We know that we're still coming upon the mark of the beast, and what that's going to be like, not being able to buy or sell, and how you're going to have to rely on instruction. You're going to be in order to say, okay, I have to take this mark of the beast or feed my children. I have to take this mark of the beast, or I don't know, how am I going to send my kids to school, or how am I going to get through college, or how am I going to make this happen in my life? I have to take the mark of the beast. And God's going to raise up leaders. He's going to give leaders instructions on what to do to prepare for the people and how to lead and guide them. Because he said that although the world's going to be forcing this upon you, that there's going to be a way of an escape, right? Those are things that you're going to need to be able to listen to someone's instruction, that God's going to give instruction to. And so it's just important, moving into this dispensation, that we remember that obedience is important. Obedience just to the word, and following instructions when they're given fully. And I'm not just saying it because it's me and I'm just telling you that I want you to be obedient to me. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, hey, let me tell you something. God could give instruction to anyone, right? But if you know that the person that is speaking to you is of God, and you know that the person hears the voice of God and has been proven, then you should listen to what it is that they have to say. And so I just want to encourage you guys to kind of begin to work on that, because I feel like there is a underlying rebellious nature in man, stronger than ever before, because it's hard to know what we can trust in. It's hard even to trust God sometimes. That's reality, because there's so much confusion out here pertaining to the things of God and the ways of God. And it's like I say all the time, it seems like a fairy tale sometimes. Most of the things that we're trying to hold fast to, they seem like a fairy tale, and it's so far away what we're trying to hold on to, right? We're trying to hold on to stories that are over 2,000 years old, and we're using them to guide our lives today. And when I say that out of my mouth now, it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. God prepared a way. He gave us a book full of the strategies that we need to be able to be successful all the way to the end. And it's up to us to be disciplined enough to say, no, I know the voice of God at this point. I know the difference. You know how you know the difference? Because God is not going to come to you using the tactics of fear, right? If someone's manipulating you based upon fear tactics, that's not of God, because God hasn't given us the spirit of fear. So he's not going to use fear to manipulate you, right? God is love and true, and he's going to tell you things, but when he gives you directions, he's not going to burden you. The Bible is clear when he says his yoke is easy and his burdens are light, right? And so he's going to come to you in a way that's going to give you peace. It may be something difficult, but he's still going to give you peace in the midst of the difficult thing that he's asking you to do or not to do, right? What makes it difficult is usually because it's something we don't want to do. So the difficultness of it doesn't have anything to do with God. Usually it's because it's not something we want to do. And it makes it difficult to choose his will over our own, because our will is not necessarily aligned with his will all the time. And sometimes we want things and we desire things to go down a path that's not what God has for us. And sometimes when we think that things are difficult or things are not going our way or they don't seem the way that we would like them to go, sometimes it's easier to do what we want to do than to listen to God. God does not use fear tactics. He does not. He wants you to respect him and have the Bible says a healthy fear of the Lord. But I'm going to say a healthy respect of the Lord, right? The fear that the Bible's talking about of the Lord is not the same as the fear of the enemy, right? The fear that he wants us to have is that, like, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Like, I love Judy, right? And I'm just using her because she's in front of me. But I would never want to hurt her. So I would be mindful that I would not do or say things that would offend her or to hurt her or to harm her, right? That's a fear that's love-driven. That's not a fear, that's like, I want to terrorize you, right? Because the enemy tries to trick us by using tormentors to cause us to be tormented by what we should be doing the right way. But we shouldn't be tormented in our love. Our love should be pure and genuine, and it should be based upon the good and the bad about a person. I know that Judy's not perfect, so I'm not going to have perfect expectations for her. I know that she is a sinner saved by grace. I know that she knows that I'm a sinner saved by grace. I hope that you all guys know that, because I try to keep it in the forefront of my leading you. I am a sinner saved by grace just like you are. I just have a different calling, a calling to lead. That's all. I mean, many of you have similar callings that you just are not walking in yet. Neither here nor there. We're all sinners saved by grace. And so we should have patience with one another, not wanting to offend or give a foothold of the enemy in each other's lives by any means. So we're supposed to be protecting and providing from a foothold, providing what's needed so there's no foothold. So from the enemy at any given time. That instruction that God gives is probably one of the most important ones that we have to make sure that we're obedient to at all times. And I think sometimes we that is the easiest one to lose sight of. He gives us those two laws to love him with all our heart, mind, and soul, and love our neighbor as ourselves for a reason. And it's a very, very hard one for us to always be mindful to be obedient to. I know you guys love how I always shifted back to that, because that's what it's all about, right? The strategy that he gave us to offset what the enemy can do in you and in me is love. And if we're obedient to the laws of love, always willing to protect and provide for the other person so that the enemy cannot have power, that takes tact, strategy, and tactics, right? The tactics is you ever notice when something goes on, a lot of times he always has someone right there kind of always in position to say, you probably shouldn't have done that. You might want to go apologize. You know what? That was messed up. You really probably shouldn't have done that, right? And sometimes it's annoying to have someone say, you were wrong. You shouldn't have done that. You need to correct that. Some of us inside despise even having to go back to say, I'm sorry. Like, I don't like to apologize, right? I'm lying. I am probably the most big apologetic person. But there are some people that have said to me out of their mouth that they don't like to apologize. They don't like to have to go back and apologize. And that's demonic within itself, right? Because we should always be willing to reconcile. That is our jobs. So I just want to encourage you guys, as simple as it may seem, as simple as the strategy is of love, as simple as it may seem, it is important that we follow those instructions. There's not a time that we should be willing to put that down. So as we're aligning ourselves with obedience and we're learning to trust God, trust God's instruction in that area, in love, and loving everyone, and calling yourself to accountability to your actions, to your words, to your gestures and your emotions, right? And calling yourself to accountability to squash those offenses. Let it go. People have things going on. People have issues and dilemmas. They have ups and downs. They have things that go wrong, things that the enemy fights them with, places that they come from. I mean, everybody got a story. The enemy done run rampant in everybody's life because that's what he's down here doing, He's seeking who he can devour. And so everyone has something that they're trying to overcome. Even if we don't think that that's justifiable to whatever they're bringing to the table, it's not for us to determine. So I just want to encourage you guys to forgive. That's also a part of the strategy that God gave, right? Because he knew that we weren't going to just be able to walk around and perfectly love people. People are going to do stuff. People are fake. People are offensive. People do hurtful things. People make crazy decisions. People are not perfect. So it's up to us to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean that they didn't do it. It just means that we choose to apply grace. Whoa, that's a concept. We get to apply grace too? You mean the same grace that is given to us? We have to choose to apply grace, right? I think for so long, when I've been teaching on forgiveness, I've left that part out. That I want to reiterate again, that grace is something that is given, and you don't have to be worthy, right? Grace is unconditional. Love is unconditional. Forgiveness is unconditional when it applies grace, right? So sometimes we can only forgive when someone apologizes or when somebody acknowledges what they've done to us, or, we see a change in them. But when you put a stamp of grace on top of that forgiveness, then it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they get it, whether they apologize, whether they've changed, or whether they've had an epiphany. It doesn't matter. Grace is undeserved forgiveness. Undeserved forgiveness. And that's what we're supposed to apply. We're supposed to apply undeserving forgiveness upon everyone. So I just want to challenge you, if you've crossed over into the new year and you're still filled with bitterness or offenses or judgments towards people about their behaviors or their attitude or things or whatever, let it go. Have grace. Grace is something that we should give because we're supposed to be walking in love. For God is love. And God requires us to love as we've been loved. Amen? Amen. Hi, this is Pastor Latoya, and if you are enjoying the message that God has given to me, then remember please to like, share, and comment. And also, if it's laid on your heart to sow a seed, the information will be linked in the description below. God bless.